April 2015. A heavy atmosphere hung over the Yazoo Delta, where the river of the same name flowed slowly through fields of reeds and crumbling mud banks. The faint yellow glow of a police car's lights reflected on the water as the investigation team crouched, peering at a rusted metal frame uncovered after a heavy rain. "Dispatch, I need backup at Reed's Ferry and send forensics to the scene." An officer's voice crackled over the radio, blending with the howling wind and the drip of water from the abandoned ferry's roof. What began as a routine check after the Yazoo River flood had now turned into something entirely different, something that would answer questions haunting Yazoo County for 37 years. A 1968 Ford Fairlane was pulled from the mud, its iron frame warped, covered in thick moss. Inside, investigators found human bones, a silver bracelet engraved with JH, and a water-stained Reed's Ferry map. These belonged to Julie Hale, the 16-year-old who vanished with Amy Reed and Michael Turner in the summer of 1978. For nearly 4 decades, their disappearance was an unanswered question. A wound the town of Yazoo had learned to live with but never truly healed. June 1978. 3 teenagers left the summer festival at First Baptist Church, saying they'd stop for soda before heading home. They never returned. Townsfolk scoured the riverbanks, and the police logged the case as runaways, but their parents didn't believe it. Each night, they sat on porches, waiting for headlights to appear at the bend of Reed's Ferry, where the Yazoo River ran murky, as if it knew something. For decades, the Reed's Ferry disappearances haunted Mississippi. 3 faces plastered on police station walls, 3 empty pews in church, and a dusty file tucked into the cold case cabinet. People thought the case was over. But the Yazoo River didn't forget. The discovery of the car in 2015 wasn't just the end of a missing persons case. It was the first domino in a chain of events exposing secrets buried under Mississippi mud for decades. As authorities followed new evidence, fingerprints on the map, a voice on a cassette tape, and a gun found in an old man's wooden cabinet, they realized the keeper of this horrific secret wasn't a stranger. It was someone the community trusted, someone who stood at the church pulpit every Sunday, praying for the 3 lost souls, while knowing exactly where they lay. The Reed's Ferry case isn't just a mystery unearthed. It's a testament to the persistence of those who refuse to stay silent, of an investigator forced out of the department who kept the scene map, and of forensic science advances that let the dead speak after nearly half a century. It's also a story of a community divided. When the 3 teens vanished in 1978, suspicion spread through Yazoo like wildfire. Neighbors turned on each other, families broke apart, and trust in the police crumbled. Those cracks would split wide open when the truth finally surfaced nearly 40 years later. What makes this case particularly haunting is that the answer was always in plain sight. The culprit was interviewed during the initial investigation, attended memorial services, shook hands with the victim's parents at prayer vigils, and maintained a calm facade for 30 years while carrying an unimaginable secret. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always curious to know how far these stories travel. Tonight, we'll go back to the summer of 1978, tracing the path of the disappearance, tampered reports, and the breakthrough that shook Mississippi, the moment the Yazoo River finally revealed what it had kept hidden for 37 years. This is a story of loss, persistence, betrayal, and ultimately, justice delayed, but never denied. Summer 1978, Yazoo County sat quietly in the humid South, where the Yazoo River crept through thick reed beds, and the air always carried the scent of mud and damp wood. By day, the heat clung to everything, and at night, cicadas gave way to the scattered sounds of insects and the distant church bell signaling the end of a summer festival day. At the small square by First Baptist Church, string lights flickered faintly as teens cleared tables and chairs. Amid the laughter and goodbyes, 3 teenagers, Amy Reed, 17, the pastor's daughter, Michael Turner, 18, her boyfriend, and Julie Hale, 16, Amy's best friend, climbed into a faded silver Ford Fairlane, saying they'd swing by the convenience store for soda before heading home. The car pulled out of the lot, its red taillights fading down the narrow road leading out of town, a road hugging the riverbank called Reed's Ferry Road. The night was thick and muggy, the wind carrying the smell of river water and the hum of the engine fading into the distance. At Pastor Reed's house, the pendulum clock ticked softly. Mrs. Reed sat in a wooden chair by the window, leaving the porch light on, waiting for the sound of the car returning. By 11, she stepped onto the porch, staring into the empty darkness. By midnight, as rain began pattering on the tin roof, no headlights appeared at the road's bend. Pastor Reed stepped out, threw on a raincoat, walked along the fence, then returned to the house, calling the Turners, the Hales, and the kids' friends. No one knew anything. The rain grew heavier, the wind tugging at the curtains, the clock in the living room ticking past midnight. Pastor Reed picked up the phone and dialed the Yazoo County Sheriff's Office. Across town, the phone rang in the empty hallway of the sheriff's station. Sheriff Roy Dunlap looked up from his desk, brushing ash from a cigarette, and wearily answered. Outside, rain lashed the windows, thunder rumbling like someone pounding on a tin roof. Pastor Reed's voice came through the static, hoarse, but trying to stay calm. The 3 kids haven't come home, and the silver Ford Fairlane is gone. Dunlap glanced at the clock, nearly 1 a.m., then jotted a few words on yellow paper. Juveniles missing, likely runaway. He leaned back, the desk lamp glinting off his tarnished badge. In Yazoo, kids running off wasn't uncommon. They usually returned in a few days, but before he could stub out his cigarette, the phone rang again. This time the Turners, then the Hales. 3 calls, 1 night, 1 road. The next morning, Dunlap sent Jack Morgan, a 29-year-old deputy, to meet the families. Morgan left the station as the rain cleared, the sky still thick with humidity. The road to Pastor Reed's house was cloaked in a thin fog, the porch light still burning from the night before. Mrs. Reed opened the door, eyes sunken, face weary. The dining table was untouched, half a cornbread loaf, and 3 cups with dried milk stains still sitting out. Morgan walked around, his fingers brushing Amy's knit jacket, still hanging on a chair. He scribbled in his notebook. No preparation, no reason to leave. Routine behavior. Pastor Reed sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly, voice choked. If they went somewhere, Amy would have left a note at least. Morgan asked, "Does she have close friends out of town?" He shook his head, then handed Morgan a photo. Amy, Michael, and Julie, standing at Reed's Ferry, sunlight blurring their hairlines. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Morgan studied the photo before slipping it into his pocket. By noon, he returned to the station. In the duty room, Dunlap stood by the window, watching the Yazoo River's waters rise to the levee. Morgan set the photo on the desk. These 3 didn't run away. All 3 vanished at once, on the same road. No signs of preparation, no conflicts, no debts. Dunlap twirled his cigarette between his fingers, exhaling softly. "Jack, it's pouring out there. The river's rising fast. If it's an accident, there's nothing left to find this morning." Morgan didn't reply. He looked through the fogged window, where rain fell like a gray curtain. By early afternoon, Dunlap finally signed off on a search order. He tapped his pen on the desk. "We'll do it for show, wait for the sky to clear, then send boats out." Morgan nodded, tucking his notebook away. Stepping outside, the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and wet earth. 3 other officers were pulling a tarp over a jeep's bed, 2 bloodhounds whining softly in their cages. Farther off, near First Baptist Church, small groups of people huddled, whispering as if afraid to break the heavy air of worry. Morgan started his car, tires splashing through puddles, the engine humming steadily. He scanned the rain-soaked town, the damp curtains, the porches still lit. As he turned onto the road to the levee, a rusted sign emerged through the rain, Reed's Ferry Road. In the distance, where the Yazoo River blended with the dark sky, thunder cracked, and a gust of wind flattened the reeds. Morgan gripped the wheel tightly. Back at the station, the radio crackled, signaling the search operation had begun. The next morning, the rain stopped, but the sky remained heavy with leaden clouds. low and drifting slowly over the Yazoo River, like the tired breath of an old beast. The river had overflowed its grassy banks, leaving a thick layer of mottled mud. Morgan and 3 other officers were assigned to the Western Levee Road, known as Reed's Ferry, the site of a defunct ferry out of use for over a decade. They joined a volunteer team with 2 trained scent dogs and a few local fishermen's wooden boats. The dogs' barks echoed in the quiet, mingling with the smell of river water and diesel. Along the muddy road, the search team's tire tracks overlapped countless older ones. Morgan stopped at a bend where the reeds were bent over. He knelt, touching the fresh mud, finding deep impressions and a sideways skid, as if 2 vehicles had stopped together, one turning back. He shone his flashlight, noting distinct tire treads, one small and smooth, likely from a passenger car. The other larger, with deep grooves typical of an off-road truck. Both led to the water's edge and stopped abruptly. No brake marks, no long skids. He stood, staring at the murky river, small waves lapping the bank like hands erasing traces. Morgan called an officer over. "Mark these coordinates." The officer planted a stake while a dog suddenly barked loudly, nose pointed toward the reeds. Morgan parted the wet grass, finding a muddy, torn piece of white fabric tangled in the roots. He bagged it in plastic and kept searching. Nearby, between exposed tree roots, he picked up a glass soda bottle, cap intact, its label faded by water. The dim morning light cast a haze over everything. Morgan photographed each item, numbering them carefully, logging the scene. Sheriff Dunlap arrived minutes later, raincoat wrapped around him, boots caked in mud. He glanced at Morgan's notes and said, voice hoarse from the cold, "We don't need to turn a runaway case into a crime, Jack. It's just mud and river trash." Morgan looked up, 2 different tire tracks, a truck and a car. Both stopped at the same spot, but only one turned back. If it was an accident, there'd be brake marks. There aren't. Dunlap crouched, gave a quick glance, then shrugged. "You're imagining things. The water's been here, mud swallows everything. Log it, but don't write anything that makes the press think we've got a criminal loose." He walked off, leaving Morgan in the drizzle, the squelch of mud under his boots. The search team expanded south. Volunteers waded through the swamp, probing reed beds. The smell of fresh mud and gasoline mingled, the hum of boat engines echoing on the river. An officer reported faint footprints 100 meters away, but water had washed them out. Morgan scanned the opposite bank with binoculars, only a stretch of pine forest and an abandoned warehouse. He sketched the scene in his notebook, marking the tire tracks and fabric. By noon, the wind shifted, and light rain returned. Morgan sat in his Jeep, wiping his camera lens, watching the river's ripples swell. His mind replayed the 2 tire tracks, 2 paths diverging from one point, only one returning. By afternoon, the search paused. They'd found only a few more drifting items, a can lid, a waterlogged paper scrap. Dunlap had them bagged as miscellaneous debris. Morgan stepped up, suggesting the fabric and bottle be sent to the Jackson Forensics Lab for prints or hair. Dunlap waved it off. Waste of time. If there was anything, the waters erased it. He ordered the team back, to resume the next morning if the rain eased. As the convoy left Reed's Ferry, Morgan glanced back at the wind-torn reeds, where the tire tracks were slowly buried in mud. Thunder rumbled faintly, blending with the engines, water splashing the windows. He opened his notebook, writing one last line. 2 tire tracks, 1 turned back. Someone left here in a different vehicle. The next morning, Yazoo's sky was thinly clouded, but still heavy, the wind carrying the smell of river mud and engine oil. Morgan set out early, driving along Highway 49, connecting downtown to Reed's Ferry. He needed to interview anyone within a 3-mile radius of the scene that rainy night. The road was dotted with puddles, broken branches scattered about. The car jolted through muddy patches, tires crunching water, the radio droning a weather report. Chance of scattered rain this afternoon. Morgan switched it off, keeping the silence to think. His first stop was Louise Bennett's gas station, a woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair, round glasses, wiping the counter while muttering to the hum of a ceiling fan. When Morgan walked in, she recognized him. Small towns meant cops and locals knew each other's names and habits. "You're here about the kids, aren't you?" she said, eyes fixed outside. Morgan nodded, opening his notebook. "What time did you close that night?" "Around 10, I was ringing up the last customer when they came in." Her voice was slow, recalling details. "3 kids, 2 girls, 1 boy. They were laughing, polite. Amy called me, ma'am, and the boy bought 3 sodas. They seemed in a hurry, said they'd cross the bridge before the rain hit." Morgan pressed. "Anyone else in the station then?" She paused, frowning. "I remember a dark green pickup parked right after them. Headlights stayed on, someone inside, but I didn't see their face. After the kids left, I looked again, and the truck was gone." Morgan looked up. "You sure it was green?" "Sure. Chevrolet, old with a decal on the back." Leaving the station, Morgan drove south along the Levee Road toward the old industrial area. He stopped when he saw a truck parked near a tire shop. The driver, Earl Givens, a 40-something man working for a Jackson transport company, ran the Yazoo-Vicksburg route. When Morgan asked, Givens looked away, sifting through memories. "That night, I was on a late delivery, around 10:30, big rain. I saw a light-colored Ford ahead, silver, I think. Then a dark green pickup tailing it. I noticed because its headlights glared, so I slowed down. At Reed's Ferry, both turned onto a side road. I didn't think much of it, but the next morning's paper gave me chills." Morgan leaned in. "Any plate numbers?" Givens shook his head. "Just recall the first 3 characters had a 6. Morgan thanked him, jotting down every detail. That afternoon, Morgan stopped at a small wooden house half a mile from Reed's Ferry, home to Harold Quinn, a farmer, and his wife. The old man answered, tall and thin, white-haired, smelling faintly of tobacco. When Morgan asked about that rainy night, Quinn frowned. "I remember, because the dogs barked all night. There was an engine revving, like someone floored it. I went to the porch, saw headlights sweep through the reeds, then go dark. Thought a car might have gone into the river, but the rain came hard, and the phone line was dead." Morgan asked him to point the direction. Quinn gestured west, right where Morgan found the tire tracks. Back at the station, Morgan mapped the testimonies. Gas station, Bend, Ferry, Quinn's house. Each dot aligned along one path, Reed's Ferry Road. He pinned the tire track photo to the wall, next to Bennett's statement. On his desk, pencil marks and slashes, silver Ford, green pickup, same direction, disappear. Late afternoon, Dunlap walked in, raincoat dripping, cigarette smoke mixing with the damp. He eyed Morgan's board, frowning. "What's this?" Morgan replied, connecting witnesses. "They all mention a green pickup, following the Ford, and an engine at the ferry." Dunlap lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and said, voice low, "Jack, don't spin a kidnapping story. The kids might have stopped to rest, and that truck was just on the same road." Morgan looked up. Coincidence that the tracks turned back at the river? That Bennett, Givens, and Quinn all point the same way? Dunlap tapped ash into the tray, glaring. "Don't write abduction in the report. Got it? We've got no crime evidence, just guesses." This town stirred up enough. Morgan stayed quiet, closing his notebook. He knew the only thing worse than no leads was being forced to ignore the one staring him in the face. Outside, dusk blanketed Yazoo, the gray sky blending with the river like an old cloth. The wind through the distant reeds sounded like the swamp's long sigh. Morgan left the room, carrying his notes and photos, stepping into the dim hallway. In his pocket, his pencil trembled with his heartbeat. He opened his notebook, writing one last line before closing it. Witnesses align, possible interception on the road, possible abduction. The night of June 20th, Yazoo was hit by a storm. Rain fell in waves, wind rattling the sheriff's station, whistling through the old chimney. In the radio room, Jack Morgan sat alone. The yellow lamplight flickered on the wet steel desk and the tattered map pinned to the wall. 3 days of searches had yielded nothing, and now silence blanketed the town. Morgan sat by an old CB radio, listening to static and occasional signals from a Jackson station. He scribbled in his notebook, a habit since the case began. Date, time, weather, areas searched. Outside, the rain mixed with insect hums, a steady, monotonous tune that tensed the listener. Near midnight, as Morgan was about to shut off the radio, a strange sound cut through the static. At first, it was just a hiss like electromagnetic waves. Then suddenly, a man's voice broke through, intermittent amid distant thunder. "Roy." They ran. "The ferry." The words were choppy but clear. Morgan froze, holding his breath. He twisted the frequency knob, trying to recapture the signal. The howling wind and rain slapping the walls made everything unsteady. But the voice came again, lower and faster, as if interrupted. "The ferry. Hurry." Then complete silence. Morgan stared at the blinking signal light, his palms sweaty. The name Roy sent a chill down his spine. In the Yazoo Sheriff's office, only one person was named Roy, Sheriff Roy Dunlap. He quickly grabbed the small cassette recorder from his coat pocket, plugged it into the radio's output, and hit record. For the next few minutes, Morgan cycled through frequencies, searching for the signal, but all he got was wind static. He replayed the tape, the sound mixed with thunder, faint but clear enough to make out those three words. He rewound and listened again, a mix of unease and alertness rising within him. By early morning, as the rain eased and lightning faded on the horizon, Morgan sat writing a report by hand, noting the time, frequency, and words heard. He placed the tape in a plastic case, labeled it in red ink, Transmission 0620, Ferry area. As the sun began to peek through the pines, he took the tape to Sheriff Dunlap. Dunlap was in his office, shirt collar open, a cold coffee on his desk. When Morgan explained, Dunlap looked up slowly, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "You sure you heard it right?" Morgan nodded, setting the cassette player on the desk. Dunlap played it, leaning close as if doubting what he heard. When the voice said, "Roy, they ran," his jaw tightened, and he stopped the tape. The room fell silent. Dunlap leaned back, then said quietly, "Just interference from Jackson's station, nothing to it." Morgan stared. Frequency 34, internal use only, no one else could transmit. Dunlap didn't answer, just took the tape, slid it into a drawer, and slammed it shut. "I'll send it to Jackson for review. Don't worry about it." Morgan stood still for a moment, feeling like something vital had slipped away. He left the office, hearing the drawer lock click behind him. In the hallway, the smell of damp paper and tobacco felt stifling. Outside, rain started again, heavy drops pattering on his car's hood. He started the engine, glancing in the rearview mirror. In that moment, he saw Dunlap still at his window, hand on the drawer, eyes fixed outward as if calculating something. 2 days later, Morgan asked the records clerk about the tape. She said no new evidence had been logged, and nothing matched the number he'd written. The tape was gone. No receipt, no signature. When Morgan returned to his desk, his file cabinet was ajar, his Reed's Ferry notes disheveled. He shut the door, sat down, lit a cigarette, and watched the smoke curl in the dim light. In Yazoo, people believed rain could wash away traces, but Morgan knew some things couldn't be erased, especially voices buried in a storm. That night, he opened his personal notebook, separate from the official files. On the first page, he wrote in black pencil, June 20th, 1978, 23:48. Transmission R. Roy, they ran the ferry. Evidence lost from official log. He closed the book, tucked it into his inner coat pocket, where the smell of tobacco and damp rain lingered. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the church bell's chime into the night. Morgan looked out the window, seeing the Yazoo River still overflowing, its surface reflecting murky lights like watchful eyes. He knew from that moment this was no longer an ordinary missing persons case. For the next 10 days, Yazoo was gripped by unprecedented tension. Search teams worked from dawn to dusk, rain still lingering. State rescue helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors blending with the rain and megaphones calling the teens' names along the river. Below, police and volunteers waded through flooded fields, soaked bloodhounds sniffing the wet ground. Morgan joined them, boots heavy with mud, his notebook's edges frayed from damp. Each day he marked a new red circle on his map. Areas searched with nothing found. The Yazoo River kept changing. That night's rain had flooded the earthen levee, washing away tire tracks, footprints, even the stakes Morgan had planted to mark the scene. When he returned to Reed's Ferry, where the tire tracks had once been clear in the mud, only a smooth surface remained, as if nothing had happened. He knelt, digging into the cold mud, but found only murky water and grass roots. The sharp smell of mud mixed with gasoline from boats humming in the distance. On day 6, divers from Jackson arrived. They anchored near the old ferry landing, diving into the brown, murky water with less than half a meter's visibility. Each time they surfaced, they shook their heads, reporting only branches, rusted metal, and old nets. Everything was blanketed in mud, any traces swallowed. Morgan stood by the bank, watching them emerge, clothes caked in mud, faces weary. One diver told him, "If there's anything down there, the rain's taken it, sir." News spread through Yazoo. The local paper's front page read, "3 teens vanish in Yazoo flood." Below were photos of the 3 smiling at the summer festival, pulled from church records. Townsfolk read in silence, shaking their heads. Everyone knew the river could swallow people, but 3 vanishing without a trace. People stopped going to the ferry at night. Kids no longer played near the levee, and adults locked doors earlier, avoiding the name Reed's Ferry. At the sheriff's office, the case became taboo. Other officers avoided it during breaks. When Morgan entered, they changed topics or feigned busyness. Dunlap acted like it was over. "No bodies, no car, no new witnesses," he said, voice hoarse and tired. "We can't chase ghosts." He closed the file, pushing it across the desk. But Morgan couldn't stop. Each night, he sat alone in his small office, flipping through mud-stained scene photos. In one, faint tire tracks were visible when tilted under light. In another, the soda bottle gleamed with water. He circled small details in red, things others deemed meaningless, and clipped them into his private notebook, separate from the official file. Under the dim yellow lamp, Morgan traced the Reed's Ferry map on translucent paper, adding his notes. 2 paths, 1 vanishes, possible encounter. On day 10, the sky cleared after weeks of rain, the Yazoo River receding. The search team stopped at a bend near the ferry. No sign of the silver Ford Fairlane, no debris, no oil, no human trace. The rescue team's final report read one line: "Search completed. Negative results." Morgan stood by his jeep, watching the river flow quietly under the sunset. For a moment, he heard insects humming from the swamp, steady and cold like metal. That night, he returned to the station late. The hallway was dark, the last light flickering. In the office, the Reed's Ferry disappearances file sat sealed with thin twine on Dunlap's desk. Morgan asked, "Are we really done?" Dunlap didn't look up, only said, "The town needs peace. People want to forget Jack." He walked past, leaving a faint smell of cigarette smoke. Morgan sat, opened his drawer, and pulled out his map and private notebook, his second memory. It held the tire track photos, witness statement copies, and a blank space for things he couldn't yet say. He wrote the day's final line, "No results. Traces erased." But some things aren't in the reports. He turned off the light and left the station. On the road, Yazoo began to rain again. The first drops hit the pavement, forming widening circles that merged into streams. In the distance, the Yazoo River silently swallowed the faint light of the old ferry. At night, Morgan looked at the dark water, thinking that not all traces were washed away. Some lay deep in the mud, waiting for someone patient enough to hear their echo. A week after the search ended, the Yazoo Sheriff's Office fell into an eerie silence. New calls piled up: car thefts, bar fights, small-town routines. The Reed's Ferry file was shelved high, buried among old papers and thin dust. But for Jack Morgan, the case lived on. Each day he arrived earlier, reopening the June 17th report, the original missing persons log, to review details. That morning, flipping to the last page, he noticed something wrong. The paper was brighter, the folds different, the text freshly typed, and most crucially, his signature was gone. The line "Report completed by J. Morgan, 2:10 a.m." had vanished, replaced by a neat signature. Clyde Merritt, Deputy. Morgan blinked, reading it again to be sure. He checked the scene description. The note "Green pickup, West Levee Road," added by his own hand, was gone. The text now read, "No additional vehicles observed in area." A simple change, but enough to erase the only lid left. Morgan sat motionless, hearing the ceiling fan clatter. Outside, morning light spilled through the window, hitting the scratched desk. He knew only a few in the office had authority to alter reports. Dunlap, or someone he trusted. Morgan marked a red circle around Clyde Merritt, then checked his drawer for the rough copy he'd kept. It was older, paper yellowed, but the line "Green pickup, West Levee Road" remained. He laid both pages side by side, two versions of one night, one erased. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from heat, but from realizing someone was burying something. At noon, when Dunlap returned from City Hall, Morgan brought the copies to his office. The sheriff was removing his hat, wiping sweat, looking weary from a meeting. "What's this, Jack?" he asked, as Morgan placed the papers on the desk. "The June 17th report." Someone swapped a page. "The signatures Merritt's." Dunlap glanced at them, a flash of irritation in his eyes. "You sure you're not mistaken?" "Merritt just proofread. I told him to help." "It's not just typos, the pickup detail's gone." Morgan spoke slowly, keeping calm. Dunlap paused, then gave a short laugh. "Jack, sometimes you drop details that confuse people. No evidence, just a gas station lady's gossip. You want the papers saying we've got a kidnapper? Yazoo doesn't need that." Morgan didn't reply. He stared at the new page. "Where no additional vehicles observed," cut like a cold blade. Dunlap handed both pages back, his tone harder. "Put these away. Don't make a fuss. I don't want you obsessing over this case. Got me?" Morgan nodded, but as he turned, Dunlap added, "If I see you pulling these documents out again, I'll send you to the evidence room. Best place for someone digging up the past." That night, the station was nearly empty. Dim lights cast shadows over desks, illuminating thick files. Morgan sat alone, opening the original copy, staring at his typed words. "Green pickup, West Levee Road, 10:45 p.m. He touched the faded ink, then drew a large red X on the Reed's Ferry map at the bend, where the tracks vanished. He wasn't sure of much, only that if someone wanted traces gone, this was the starting point. Leaving the office, the hallway echoed with the clock's ticks. Morgan turned off the light, taking the original copy, tucking it into his chest pocket's leather case. Outside, Yazoo was cloaked in thick fog, streetlights glinting through the mist. He drove over the old wooden bridge, stopping midway, looking at the river. The Yazoo's water flowed slowly, murky, reflecting the dark sky, and a few raindrops rippling into circles. Morgan pulled his pencil, scribbling in his notebook, "Report altered. Clyde Merritt signed. Pickup detail erased." From afar, the church bell tolled 11 times, blending with distant thunder from an approaching storm. Morgan looked at his map, adding a red dot at the river bend, where he believed all answers were hidden under the mud. He folded the map, clipped it tightly in his notebook, knowing from now on, what he wrote no longer belonged to the sheriff's files, but to him alone. In 1980, 2 years after the Reed's Ferry summer, the disappearance of the 3 teams was officially labeled, investigated, no results. The thin file, holding a few photos, smudged notes, and a typed conclusion. No evidence of foul play was enough to close the chapter. In the Yazoo Sheriff's Office archive, the document was tied, labeled in black ink, and shelved high with cases no one wanted to revisit. In the halls, whispers said Reed's Ferry was an accident. The kids slid into the river, rain and water sweeping everything away. No one wanted to believe otherwise. No one asked Morgan. On his last morning at the office, Morgan's file cabinet was cleared. The original report he'd submitted was replaced with a clean reprint, listing only basic details. The Clyde Merritt signed copy he kept hidden in his inner coat pocket. Dunlap watched him through the frosted glass door, saying nothing. As Morgan stepped out, the sheriff spoke. "Sometimes people need to forget to move on, Jack." Morgan paused, replying softly. "And sometimes they forget too soon." He left, carrying his worn leather briefcase. Yazoo returned to its quiet rhythm. First Baptist Church reopened after the storm season, Sunday services still full. Houses along the levee were fixed, new railings built by the river, but at the old ferry landing, reeds grew thick, only a few rotten boards poking from the water. The Reed family moved to Jackson, selling their small house overlooking the flooded fields. The Turners joined relatives in Memphis, and Julie Hale's mother moved to her sisters in Louisiana, carrying a photo of the three kids smiling by an apple pie. Each family left without a memorial, no bodies, no closure. They left an empty space in their homes, and a faint hope that maybe, somewhere, their children were still alive. The Yazoo Sheriff's Office slowly changed staff. Clyde Merritt was promoted to lieutenant, overseeing records. Dunlap aged quickly, hair graying, health fading. Each time Morgan returned to town, he saw averted faces, as if Reed's Ferry was a crack no one dared touch. He had no close colleagues left. In 1980, Morgan applied to transfer to the FBI's New Orleans branch. His request was brief. Seeking transfer for federal training program. No one at the office asked why. Leaving, he took only two things: the Reed's Ferry map with its red X and his leather notebook of personal notes. The pages, stained by rain, edges worn, still held his scrawled words: "Green pickup, 10:45 p.m., West Levee Road." He packed them carefully into his briefcase, locked it, and placed it on the seat as he drove out of Yazoo. Heading south through fields of white cotton, Morgan stopped at the wooden bridge overlooking the river. The Yazoo's water churned, muddy, sunlight casting faint streaks. Each ripple felt like a pulse of memory, flowing then vanishing. He sat there, listening to late-season cicadas and wind through the trees, and for a moment, thought he heard that old voice from the rainy night's radio. "Roy, they ran." The voice, though faint, was etched in his mind like a mark on metal. In New Orleans, Morgan started his new job at the Federal Investigations Office. Colder, more procedural, but less bound by small-town silences. He never mentioned Yazoo in meetings, but on quiet nights, he opened his old briefcase, spreading the map on the table. The red X at Reed's Ferry had faded, but to him, it wasn't just a mark of a place. It was a reminder that something still lay under that mud, unspoken. Once, during another case, a young colleague asked why Morgan kept worthless old papers. He only said, "Because sometimes, paper remembers more than people." The colleague laughed, thinking it a joke, but Morgan said no more. He knew memory was the only evidence that couldn't be sealed, and when everyone chose to forget, the one who remembered kept the case alive. In the years that followed, the Reed's Ferry disappearances file slept in Yazoo's cold storage. Its cover faded, twine frayed. But for Morgan, the case never truly ended. Each time rain pattered on a tin roof, he recalled that first night when the phone rang in the storm, and the voice on the radio spoke three words he'd never forget. When a case is forgotten, only the one who remembers becomes its witness. Spring 2015, Yazoo faced a brutal rainy season like 40 years before. The river rose high, heavy with mud, eroding the old banks around Reed's Ferry, a place no longer named. Thunder rolled for nights, rain pouring as if emptying the town's memories. When it cleared, the western riverbank had collapsed, mud sliding into the coffee-colored water. One early morning, Earl Cunningham, a farmer living alone near his land, drove his tractor to check fences and saw metal glinting under the mud. He stepped closer and realized it wasn't a tin sheet, but something larger, deeper, a warped iron frame of a car. Cunningham called the county police, and within an hour, the area was cordoned off. Mud reached knee-deep river water still spilling over the fresh collapse. The rescue team set up barriers, the smell of wet earth mixing with diesel from pumps. A small crane arrived. As the hook pulled through the rusted steel, A shape emerged from the mud. A 1968 Ford Fairlane, its silver paint mostly peeled, rear wheel broken, driver's door still locked. The older onlookers stood silent, for it was a rare model, and in Yazoo's memory, only one silver Ford like that was ever mentioned. The car of Amy Reed, lost with 3 teens in 1978. When the car was fully pulled onto the bank, the forensics team from Jackson was called in. They set up a tent, carefully prying open the door. The smell of mud mixed with old metal filled the air. Inside, the river water had receded, leaving a thick layer of rust on the seats. On the floor by the passenger seat, they found a piece of human bone, small, dark brown, possibly an arm bone. Nearby was a silver bracelet, engraved with a faint but legible JH on the back seat. Pressed among decayed debris was a water-stained piece of paper, a map of Reed's Ferry, its blue ink blurred but still showing the river and old levee road. News spread quickly. Within hours, a photo of the mud-covered car appeared on the local paper's front page with bold text. Car pulled from Yazoo River may solve 1978 mystery. People gathered at the riverbank, standing behind barriers, watching the car in silence, as if before a freshly opened grave. For the town, it wasn't just news, it was a memory resurrected, a wound that never scarred over. The Yazoo County Sheriff's Office sent all evidence to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. Inside the car, every detail was photographed and sealed per protocol. Under fluorescent lights, the drying mud revealed rust patterns resembling handprints on the steering wheel. A technician whispered, "Someone locked the door from the outside." On the window, they found horizontal scratches, like marks from a metal hook. Mud samples were collected for analysis, compared to Yazoo River sediment from the 1970s. All initial data pointed to one time frame, summer 1978. When the car's VIN was entered into the system, results came back in minutes. MS-492G, registered to Reverend Samuel Reed, Amy Reed's father. The records confirmed it was the Ford Fairlane reported missing 47 years earlier. Yazoo County held its breath. The mayor held a brief press conference, stating, "The investigation will reopen under the oversight of the State Department of Public Safety." The news reached New Orleans, where Jack Morgan, now 74, lived in a small house by a canal. He got a call early that morning. A young woman's voice, clear and firm, came through. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Agent Carla Vega, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. We found the Ford Fairlane tied to the 1978 Reed's Ferry case. I thought you'd want to know." Morgan was silent for a long time. He looked out the window at the old map on his wall, where the red X had faded to pale pink. After a moment, he said slowly, "I always knew the river would give back what it held." Within a week of the Ford Fairlane's recovery from the Yazoo River, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation formed the Cold Case Unit, Reed's Ferry Disappearances. Their temporary headquarters was set in an old Jackson Traffic Police building, where dim fluorescent lights reflected off smoke-stained walls. The air in the first meeting was tense and heavy, like a memory awakened after decades buried. The team consisted of 3, Jack Morgan, now retired but invited as a special consultant for writing the 1978 report. Agent Carla Vega, a meticulous DNA analyst from the State Justice Department, and Detective Chris Carter, MBI's youngest investigator, specializing in 3D scene reconstruction. They sat around an iron table, on it a photo of the mud-caked Ford, the silver JH bracelet, and the water-stained map sealed in clear plastic. Morgan stayed silent through the first meeting, listening as Vega presented. Her voice was steady. "The bone sample doesn't match the biological profiles of the 3 victims. We're talking about a male, aged 30 to 35, dead for about 4 to 5 decades. And crucially, he was never reported missing in Yazoo." Morgan looked at the enlarged photo of the car. Forensics had photographed every angle, measured every scratch. Under the mud and rust, they found drag marks along the undercarriage, as if it was hooked and pulled down a slope with force. The rear wheels were deformed downward, while the front had horizontal scratches, proof the car didn't crash into the river, but was pushed or pulled by mechanical force. Carter, standing by a laser-projected 3D model, pointed at the screen. If it was an accident, the car would have drifted with the current. But here, the impact direction's opposite. I'm certain it was pushed from the bank. Vega nodded, adding, the lock from the outside confirms it. Someone wanted something inside to stay there. The room grew heavy. Morgan leaned back, eyes on the car's image on the screen. In the pale blue projector light, he saw that 1978 morning again, standing among the reeds, staring at two tire tracks leading to the water. He said softly, I told them then. Two vehicles stopped together, one left, one stayed. But when I wrote it in the report, it disappeared. Vega turned, asking quietly, disappeared. Morgan nodded, page swapped, signed by Clyde Merritt. Carter paused his work, asking, whose Merritt? Morgan answered slowly, Deputy Sheriff of Yazoo County then. The only one besides me and Sheriff Dunlap who could alter files. His voice carried something old and cold, like a recording played after years of silence. That afternoon, the team moved to the state forensics lab, where the Ford was stored. White light shone along the mud-covered frame, the smell of rust and river water thick in the air. Carter, gloved, inspected scratches on the rear bumper. He said, almost to himself, two impact directions, one from the front, one from the back. This car was pinned. Vega typed notes on a tablet, then asked, Mr. Morgan, did your 1978 report mention any trucks? Morgan pressed his lips. Dark green pickup, Chevrolet 75. The gas station owner said it parked right after the kid's car, but that line was erased. Vega fell silent. She opened the evidence bag, examining the silver bracelet. Inside, beyond the JH, was a small scratch, like it rubbed against metal. Under a microscope, they found a fine hair stuck in dried mud on the clasp. We can try DNA extraction, she said. If we're lucky, it's intact enough to match current records. Morgan stepped back, looking out the lab's window. The spring rain had stopped, weak sunlight piercing the clouds, glinting on the distant river. He thought of the 37 years between two moments. A rainy night and a sunny day, same river, same car. The river doesn't change, he said softly. Only we get old. Vega heard, but didn't respond. They worked until evening. As others left, Carter gathered the 3D printouts, saying to Vega, the man in the car might be the killer, not a victim. If so, we're looking for someone who killed a killer. Vega looked at him, her eyes sharp behind glasses, or a silenced accomplice. Morgan stayed in the room alone. He opened his old leather notebook, placing it beside the new photos. One side held real mud, the other his 1978 scribbles. Two timelines crossed. He drew a small symbol below the faded red X, writing in a shaky hand, fourth person, identity unknown. Leaving the building, Jackson glowed with nightlights reflecting through thin rain. The car radio played a brief report. Mississippi Bureau of Investigation confirms new findings in the 1978 Reed's Ferry case. The investigation has officially reopened. Morgan switched it off, staring through the fogged windshield. He didn't smile, only muttered, 37 years, and the river finally speaks again. In the lab, Vega stayed late. Through the microscope, she saw the hair on the silver bracelet glint like a thread. She noted the day's final entry, sample 1978 RF04, male, estimated age 30, 35, unknown identity. Then she typed one more word, short and cold, fourth. 2 weeks after the cold case unit formed, Jackson's Central Archive sent a thick box labeled Yazoo County 1978-1981. Inside were hundreds of old reports, mostly minor, thefts, fights, disturbances. But one name stopped Morgan, Lucas Barnes. A thin report, typed on an old Underwood, stamped October 4, 1979. The first line read, suspect arrested at Reed's Ferry area for assault, with intent to harm, victim female, 24. Below was a bold slanted signature, Deputy Clyde Merritt. Morgan read slowly, then flipped to Merritt's account. Barnes showed signs of intoxication, aggressive, carrying a dagger, attempted to drag victim to riverbank, but was spotted by locals. The final line, suspect transported to Yazoo County Jail without incident. Morgan laid two papers side by side, the 1979 assault report and the 1978 Reed's Ferry file, where Merritt swapped pages and erased the green pickup line. Two incidents, same area, same signer. He sat still, faint light from the window, hitting the desk, casting shadows of the Reed's Ferry map on the wall. Below the old red X, he wrote in pencil, Lucas Barnes, possible connection. That afternoon, Morgan shared the find with Vega and Carter. In the meeting room, white light reflected off a board thick with photos and notes. Vega adjusted her glasses, saying, Barnes, born 1949, worked as a freight laborer at Reed's Ferry from 1976 to 1979. No family records. Arrested in 1979 for assault, sent to Rankin County Jail. 2 years later, 1981, died in custody. Recorded as suicide by hanging. No one claimed the body. Carter looked at Morgan. So, a year after the disappearance, Merritt arrests him right at Reed's Ferry. Morgan nodded, and now, in the kid's car we find bones of a man in his 30s. Carter dropped his pen, leaning back. If he's the man in the car, he's either the killer or someone's victim. But the coincidence bugs me. Merritt's in both cases. Vega entered new data. I'll request a DNA check on Barnes if Rankin kept biological samples from his death. They often stored hair or nails for evidence. 3 days later, results arrived. Vega held the envelope, opening it carefully before the others. The thin paper read coldly. YS chair profile obtained. Partial match with bone sample 2015 RF04. Vega read slowly, then looked up. It matches. The bone in the Ford is Lucas Barnes. The room went silent. Carter set down his pen, whispering, So, the man in the car isn't one of the kids, it's him. The killer, who stood by the scene, is now in their car. Morgan leaned on the table, voice hoarse. And who signed his arrest, then saw him die in jail? Merritt. The words landed like an indictment in the quiet room area. Vega pieced it together. He worked at the ferry, knew Reed's Ferry well, had a vehicle, a boat, knew the deep spots. When the disappearance happened, he left town for weeks. Then arrested, died in jail 2 years later, unclaimed. Carter flipped through old criminal records. Barnes' mugshot was grainy. His face angular, eyes deep, jaw rigid. Below Barnes, Lucas, male, 5'11", 176 pounds, laborer, known to carry knife. He set the photo beside the enlarged JH bracelet image. The silver gleamed faintly under the light. If he was the last to see the victims, Carter said, why did he end up dead in their car? Morgan stared at the photo, then said softly, because someone wanted him gone, just like they wanted the kids gone. He picked up Merritt's signed report, laying it over the Deputy Clyde Merritt's signature. He was just a deputy then, but allowed to handle the scene, swap report pages, sign arrests, all circling Reed's Ferry. Vega noted, Merritt authority link. Possible concealment. She looked at Morgan. You think Merritt was involved in the disappearance? He replied. I think he knew something, and the only one who could silence Barnes was him. That night, Morgan stayed late. In the dim room, the desk lamp reflected on his old map, red ink darkening over years. He looked at the Reed's Ferry mark, then drew a line to Lucas Barnes' name, newly pinned up. Below he wrote, Connection Merritt, Barnes, Reed's Ferry. 1978, 1979. Outside, Jackson rained. Water tapped the glass, like that night in the radio room. Morgan played his old recorder, the tape he'd kept for decades. Static hummed, then the man's faint voice, Roy, they ran. The ferry. He closed his eyes, listening closely. Now each word fit a piece of the emerging picture. Roy, Sheriff Dunlap. The ferry, the landing. And between them, the fourth man, Lucas Barnes, who was there, who died in silence. When the tape stopped, Morgan opened his notebook, writing the day's final line. He wasn't a ghost, he lived, he knew. The fourth man, not the last victim, but a witness buried with them. The Mississippi State Forensics Lab sat on a small Jackson Street, its gray concrete walls stained by rain, always smelling faintly of ethanol and metal. That morning, Vega arrived early. She carried the evidence bag with the 1978 map and the J.H. silver bracelet, their clear plastic glinting under fluorescent lights, dried mud shimmering like metallic sand. Morgan and Carter entered after, watching silently. They knew today could be a turning point. Vega, in a white lab coat and gloves, placed the old map on a stainless steel table. The paper was yellowed, musty, edges torn, but the Yazoo River and Reed's Ferry Road, drawn in blue ink, were visible. "This paper has high cellulose content," she said softly. "If there's oily residue from fingerprints, even faint, we can recover it with vacuum metal deposition." Morgan stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the map, evidence he last saw in 1978, now back before him after 37 years. In a vacuum chamber, Vega placed the map, sealed the glass, and started the machine. A low hiss sounded as fine gold and zinc particles sprayed under high pressure, coating the paper. Within minutes, faint patterns emerged, swirling fingerprints, tiny ridges clear. Vega adjusted the light, snapping scans. "2 sets," she said. "One swirl type, small and even, possibly a woman or teenager. The other's arch type, wide, heavy pressure, a man." She sent the data to the analyzer, the software comparing it to the state database. The screen read, "Searching, please wait. 1 minute, 2, then results. Match found, Lucas Barnes." Vega printed the comparison. The ridges, slopes, and sweat pores matched perfectly. She turned, saying slowly, "The fingerprints on the map match Barnes. He held the Reed's Ferry map at least once, possibly before the disappearance." Morgan gripped the chair, silent. Carter looked at the scan, muttering, "He was there. He held it." The three stood quiet. Only the hum of the ventilation system in the background. Vega removed her gloves, moving to the second item, the silver bracelet. Using an electron microscope, she scanned its surface, finding a fine fiber stuck in dried mud on the clasp. "Could be hair or skin," she said, carefully placing it in a vial. She began Y-star DNA extraction, a method for identifying male genetic markers in degraded samples. The process took over 2 hours. Outside, light rain tapped the windows. Morgan stood by the door, watching droplets slide down like years worn away. When Vega returned, she held a warm printout, her voice calm but eyes betraying shock. "The DNA on the bracelet matches the Merritt family Y-star profile, 7 of 8 markers. Error chance, 1 in a million." No one spoke for a long moment. Carter exhaled, barely audible. Morgan leaned over the results, reading each line. The scientific symbols and cold numbers rang like a call from the past. "Merritt," he whispered. The deputy signed the report, erased the pickup, arrested Barnes, and now his DNA's on one of the kids' evidence. Vega sat up, closing the file. "This creates a direct link. Barnes, Reed's ferry worker, Merritt, investigating deputy, both leaving traces on 2 items in the car. Before or after the crime, they touched the scene." Carter crossed his arms, voice low, "And only 2 possibilities. Merritt helped hide the bodies, or he was there when Barnes died." Morgan turned to the wall's pinboard, where 2015 scene photos were linked to 1978 files with red strings. He pinned up the fingerprint and DNA results, drawing a straight line between them, writing in red, "Direct link established, police and worker at crime scene." His pen trembled slightly, but the writing was firm. "No doubt now," Vega said. "We've got physical evidence and a connection between those at Reed's Ferry that night." Morgan looked at the board, saying softly, "One was buried with the car, the other became a pastor. Both thought the river could keep their secret forever." Carter looked up, asking, "What now?" Vega replied, eyes on the board. "Get a warrant for Merritt's house. If he's alive, it's time he talks." Morgan nodded slightly, as if agreeing to a verdict already written. He looked through the fogged window, rain falling lightly on Jackson, water trickling south, toward Yazoo. That night, as the lab emptied, Morgan stayed. He opened his old leather notebook, thickened by years, writing a short line on a new page. Barnes' fingerprints, Merritt's DNA, both at the scene. Cop and worker, guarding the same secret. He set the pen down, looking through the glass, where lights reflected on the rainy surface. "No one keeps a promise to the river forever," he said softly. "Eventually, the water speaks for them." 3 days after the DNA results, Vega returned to the State Evidence Archive to search for audio data. Morgan mentioned in his old report. She doubted she'd find anything. Most 1970s tapes were decayed, many destroyed in the 1985 flood. But checking the digitized catalog, she found an unmatched case code, RF 78 CB, an old Yazoo County marker. The note read, "Audio file, unidentified transmission, logged 1978. No playback device." Vega requested the vault opened, and after nearly an hour, a clerk brought a small, rusted tin box containing a black cassette, its faded label barely legible, 26, Ferry. When Morgan saw it, he froze. He touched the tin with his fingertips, cold as if touching time. "I thought it was gone," he said softly. Vega nodded. "It was misfiled, probably when records moved to state. It's still sealed, with your signature." Morgan looked at the faded purple ink. J. Morgan, evidence. The audio lab was in MBI's basement, thick soundproof walls, soft blue light. Vega placed the tape in a digital converter, running it slowly to avoid snapping. Static crackled first, then distorted sounds, like wind through wires. She adjusted filters, reducing noise, sharpening fragments. Amid the storm and radio waves, a man's voice emerged. Broken. "Roy, Clyde," they ran. The ferry. The room fell silent. Morgan stood still, eyes closed. That voice, 40 years ago, haunted his short and long dreams. Now, it was chillingly clear. Vega replayed it, isolating the voice, running it through spectral voice identification software, analyzing frequency, pitch, breath, and vocal cord vibration. The comparison used two sources, the tape's voice and a 1980 internal interview recording of Clyde Merritt as a deputy. On the screen, two graphs appeared, red-orange bands for pitch, tone, and breath. The software processed for minutes, then stopped on match 82% probability. Vega removed her headphones, looking at Morgan. The voice on the tape matches Merritt at 82%. That's enough for a search warrant, and in a criminal case, it's high-value evidence. Morgan sat down, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the tape replaying on the screen, the sound waves steady, interrupted by 3 bursts of static. He remembered that night, alone in the station, hearing the voice through the storm. "Roy." They ran. The ferry. Now, each word cut like a knife, reopening an old wound. He said softly, "Roy was Dunlap, the sheriff. Clyde was Merritt." They ran. The ferry. They fled to the ferry. And then, all 3 kids vanished. Carter, who had been watching, nodded. If Merritt was at the scene that night, he wasn't just a witness. He was talking to someone on the radio, maybe Dunlap. And this was on an internal channel, not public. Vega added, frequency 34 was exclusive to Yazoo police radios. No one else had access. They sent the analysis to the legal department. A day later, the official audio report confirmed, audio sample RF 78. CB contains voice of male individual, probable identity, Clyde Merritt, referencing Roy and Ferry in context, consistent with geographic and personal associations. The conclusion was dry, but Morgan felt his chest tighten as he read it. That evening, the team met privately in Carter's office. Vega spread out the old Yazoo map, pointing to Reed's Ferry Road. If the signal came from here, Merritt was within a mile of the ferry with Dunlap, and we know Barnes worked there. So, all 3 were at the same place. Carter nodded, his voice firm. 1 girl dead, 1 silenced, and 1 who survived to become a pastor. No doubt now. Vega opened the file, placing the voice analysis beside the DNA and fingerprint reports. 3 papers, 3 pieces of physical evidence, formed a line. Barnes, Merritt, Dunlap. All converged at Reed's Ferry. She wrote on the whiteboard, probable participants, Dunlap, Merritt, Barnes. Victims, A. Reed, M. Turner, J. Hale. Morgan stared at the words for a long time. I used to think, he said quietly, I was just documenting a missing persons case, but it turns out, I was documenting the night cops became criminals. His voice caught, like a late confession. The next morning, Vega filed for a search warrant for Clyde Merritt's home, now a retired pastor in Yazoo City. The warrant was approved that day, citing matching voice evidence and DNA connection. It bore the judge's signature and Mississippi's round red seal. When Carter showed Morgan the warrant, he only nodded. I've waited 37 years for this, he said, voice low and weary. Tonight, we go back to Reed's Ferry, where the case should have ended that summer. Outside, Jackson drizzled. The rain tapped the tin roof, steady and cold, just like the night Morgan first heard the voice in the 1978 storm. But this time, instead of static, the internal radio in Carter's car crackled, Merritt search warrant approved. Deploy tomorrow morning. Morgan looked through the fogged window, whispering, finally, the river gives back its voice. On the morning of August 12, 2015, Yazoo's sky was overcast, fog lingering around low hills and roadside trees. The warrant was approved at 6:45 a.m., and by 7:10, a convoy of Mississippi State Police and 2 FBI agents quietly entered a residential area in North Yazoo City. Leading was Detective Chris Carter. In the second car were Agent Carla Vega, and in the back seat, Jack Morgan, silent, clutching his old notebook. He'd seen Clyde Merritt's name too many times in files, but this was the first time he'd faced the man, not just a signature. Pastor Merritt's house stood alone at the end of Maple Grove, a 2-story wooden home, painted white, with a wide porch and a small sign, reading Yazoo City Baptist Ministry. The scene was so peaceful, no one could imagine it hid buried memories. As the convoy stopped, curious neighbors peeked from windows, then drew their curtains. Carter signaled the local SWAT team to surround the area while Vega stepped onto the porch, warrant in hand. The door opened before she could knock. A tall, silver-haired man, with a gaunt face and calm eyes, stood waiting. His white shirt was buttoned to the collar, a small cross pendant on his chest. I knew you'd come, he said, his voice eerily calm. Vega held up the warrant. We have a legal search warrant related to the 1978 Reed's Ferry case. Are you Pastor Clyde Merritt? Yes, he replied, stepping aside. I don't defy God's will, nor the law. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and incense. The walls held photos of baptisms, framed sermons, and shelves of worn Bibles. Carter split the team to search each room. Vega went straight to the ground floor study, dimly lit, a desk, dusted lightly, holding an open Bible and a cold teacup. She touched the third drawer, pulling it open to find a small wooden box, locked with a brass clasp. She pried it open with a knife. Inside, wrapped in coarse cloth, was a Smith & Wesson .38, lightly rusted at the barrel. Beside it, a yellowed folded paper with scrawled writing, Barnes, Ferry, done. Carter, in the basement, found a stack of plastic-wrapped newspapers, Yazoo Herald issues from 1978 and 1979, all covering the Reed's Ferry disappearance. In the June 28, 1978, edition, the headline, 3 Teens Vanish in Yazoo Flood, was circled in red ink, with a handwritten note. Roy said wait. Carter called Vega down, his voice tense. As she entered, his flashlight revealed a wall of framed papers, not family photos, but notes. Yazoo River maps cut from old hydrology guides, some marked in red, especially around Reed's Ferry. Morgan approached, his eyes locking onto the map's markings, identical to his own from years ago. He bent down, picking up a paper fallen under the table. An old photo of 3 young men in Yazoo County police uniforms, standing before the station. Roy Dunlap, Clyde Merritt, and Lucas Barnes. The 3 names tied to every corner of the case. In the photo, Merritt was smiling, his hand on Barnes' shoulder. Morgan felt a tightness in his chest, like someone squeezing it. Vega brought the gun to the on-site examination table, removing the magazine, checking the serial number filed off. She scanned it with UV light, revealing 3 faint digits, 741. She looked at Morgan, recall any evidence report with a similar number. He answered instantly. A .38 bullet casing from Reed's Ferry, 1978, logged as 741B, never matched to a gun. Carter frowned. This could be it. As the forensics team loaded evidence into the van, Merritt stood on the porch, hands clasped, gazing down the street. Vega approached, reading his rights in an even tone. He didn't react, only gave a faint smile. As Carter cuffed his wrists, Merritt said softly, just loud enough for Morgan to hear, "The river kept my secret for 37 years. I thought it would forever." The words chilled Morgan. He looked at the silver-haired man, face lined with wrinkles, but eyes steady. "You knew no river keeps secrets forever," Morgan replied. Merritt nodded slightly, letting them lead him away. That afternoon, as the car carrying Merritt left Yazoo City, a light rain began. Neighbors stood behind curtains, watching. News spread fast. Local pastor arrested in Reed's Ferry case. Reporters gathered at the church gate, lenses panning to the sealed door. In the MBI office in Jackson, Vega placed the gun on a steel table beside the Barnes Ferry done paper. She photographed it, sealing it with a new code. Carter read the note. "Barnes Ferry, done," he said slowly. "Done. Finished or over," Morgan replied. "Or buried." When the inventory report was complete, Vega looked at Morgan. 37 years you waited, and now the river's given us the gun, the evidence, and the man who stayed silent. Morgan sat, writing in his notebook, August 12, 2015. Clyde Merritt arrested at home, with S&W.38, 1978 report, and Barnes Ferry, done. The river has spoken. Outside, rain pattered steadily on the building's roof. Carter looked through the window, seeing water stream from the eaves, flowing into drains, all heading toward Yazoo. He said softly, "Now the river doesn't have to keep anyone's secrets anymore." That night, Morgan returned home late. Before turning off the light, he looked at the photo of the 3 men in police uniforms, once standing like brothers. Now, only one was left to answer. He closed his notebook, murmuring Merritt's words. "The river kept my secret for 37 years. Then he added alone, his voice blending with the night rain. "No, Clyde. It's just that the river finally claimed it back." The Mississippi State Ballistics Lab sat in a gray, unmarked building on Jackson's outskirts. The place was oddly quiet. Only the hum of compressors and faint clinks of metal. After the Smith & Wesson .38 from Merritt's home arrived, Vega immediately requested a comparison with bullet casings from Reed's Ferry in 1978. Evidence forgotten in storage for nearly 4 decades. She and a technician prepared on a tempered glass table. 2 casings sat side by side, their brass glinting under white light. Morgan stood behind the observation glass, hands clasped. He'd held those casings years ago, when it was all just suspicion and silence. Now time seemed to close a circle. The ballistics technician, a middle-aged man named Harris, carefully placed each casing under a digital comparison microscope. 2 magnified images appeared on the screen, spiral grooves, fine and sharp, curling around the casings. Each gun leaves a unique pattern, no 2 alike. Harris moved the cursor, zoomed in, and paused. "Look here," he said quietly. On the screen, the grooves, one from 1978, one from the 2015 gun, matched perfectly, ridge for ridge. He tilted the light to double-check. No discrepancy. Vega stepped closer, eyes fixed on the screen. Complete match. Harris nodded. "No doubt. The casings from Reed's Ferry were fired from this Smith & Wesson." The room fell silent. Morgan took a deep breath, staring at the gun on the steel table, recalling the report he wrote 40 years ago. A report later altered, pushed into oblivion. He heard Dunlap's voice, Merritt's, and that rainy night's radio. "Roy, Clyde." They ran. The ferry. Vega moved to the next step. DNA analysis. Gloved, she swabbed the gun's grip, focusing on the worn rubber grooves. The sample was processed in the YS-TER analyzer. Results printed hours later, the grip held 2 DNA profiles. One Merritt's, one a perfect match to the bone sample from the Ford, Lucas Barnes. She laid the results side by side, her voice low. Barnes handled this gun. And Merritt's sample overlaps, meaning he held it after, or at least when Barnes could no longer resist. Carter skimmed the report, exhaling softly. Fits the theory. Merritt killed Barnes. Morgan leaned on the table, his gaze darkening. He spoke slowly, as if reasoning to himself. In 1979, Merritt signed the arrest report for Barnes' assault on a woman. No one saw him after, until he died in jail, but the death record only says suicide. If Barnes died in custody, why were his bones in the Ford buried under the river? He paused, staring at the gun. Because Merritt never took him to jail. He shot Barnes, then sank the car. Vega nodded silently. It all fits. Ballistics, DNA, timeline. Barnes died in 1979, a year after the disappearance. His killer was the deputy then, Clyde Merritt. Carter looked at the gun, its metal glinting like an unspoken confession. That afternoon, Vega finalized the forensic report. The final line bolded. Ballistic evidence confirms identical striation pattern between recovered firearm and cartridge cases from 1978. Reed's Ferry site. DNA mixture on firearm grip shows YS-TER profile match between Merritt and deceased Lucas Barnes. Conclusion. Weapon used by Merritt in 1979 homicide of Barnes. She placed the printout before Morgan. He read slowly, his finger pausing on 1979 homicide. That year, he was a young cop, seeking justice in the dark, while his colleague hid the truth. Now, it was brutally clear. The evidence was sent to the criminology lab for documentation photos. As the final image was taken, Vega looked through the lens, saying to Carter, "When a gun sleeps for 40 years and still speaks, justice was never dead." Carter replied softly, "Just buried in mud." When the team finished, Morgan lingered. He sat, eyes on the Smith & Wesson, memories flooding back. Merritt, who called him Jack, who laughed during their patrols. Now, his gun was the confession. That evening, a closed press conference was held at MBI. Vega presented to the state prosecutor's representatives. When the slide showed the bullet groove comparison, the room went silent. The prosecutor concluded, "We have a direct link between Merritt and Lucas Barnes' death. Probable motive, silencing a loose end in the Reed's Ferry case. A preliminary indictment will be prepared." Morgan returned home late, Jackson drizzling. He lit his desk lamp, opened his leather notebook, and wrote in shaky but firm lines. Set in W.38. Merritt's gun, perfect match to 1978. Reed's Ferry casings, Merritt's DNA over Barnes. He killed his accomplice to bury the secret. None of them thought the water would speak for the dead. He closed the notebook, listening to the rain tap steadily on the tin roof, like that stormy night long ago. Out there, the Yazoo River flowed, carrying mud, debris, and stories people thought buried deep. But tonight it spoke, through metal, ballistics, and blood traces on a gun's grip. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's interrogation room was on the 3rd floor, cold white light spilling from the ceiling, reflecting off a gray steel table. 3 people sat: Clyde Merritt, retired pastor and former Yazoo County deputy, Agent Carla Vega, and Jack Morgan, now a special consultant. Merritt sat upright, hands clasped, his face expressionless. The 76-year-old had been silent for 2 days since his arrest. He refused a lawyer, saying only, "I have nothing left to hide, but nothing to say." That morning, Vega placed 3 sealed evidence bags before Merritt: the Smith & Wesson .38, the Barnes Ferry Dunn note, and the cassette tape. She said calmly, "You were a cop. You know the process. We have ballistics, DNA, and audio evidence. This is your last chance to tell the truth your way." Merritt looked at the glossy plastic bags, his eyes still calm. "You wouldn't believe me," he said softly, his voice raspy like old paper. Morgan leaned forward, voice low. "Clyde, I believe you. But I want to hear it from you, not the river. Vega started the recorder, pressing play. Static crackled, then the man's voice in the storm. Roy, Clyde, they ran. The ferry. Merritt showed no reaction at first, but as Vega replayed it a second, then third time, his face changed. The muscles around his mouth twitched faintly. She turned up the volume, and for a moment, it was as if the room slipped back to that June night in 1978. On the fourth play, Merritt lowered his head, his hands visibly shaking. He whispered, as if speaking to someone else. I begged God to make that voice go away, but it stayed. For 37 years. Morgan leaned closer. Clyde, the tape names two people. Roy and Clyde, who are they? Merritt looked up, his eyes cloudy and tired. Roy was Roy Dunlap. The sheriff, and Clyde, he paused, voice catching, was me. The room's air thickened. Vega stopped the tape, nodding slightly. So tell us. Merritt was silent, so long only the air conditioner's hum filled the space. Then he began, slowly, haltingly, as if pulling each word from deep memory. Barnes worked at Reed's Ferry. He knew the area, had an old green pickup. He told Roy the kids hung out after the festival, maybe carrying church donations. Roy was in debt, gambling. He wanted to teach them a lesson. I was just told to follow, but Barnes took them to the ferry, and things got out of hand. Vega asked quietly, so the three kids didn't die in an accident? Merritt shook his head, tears welling. No, no. Barnes tried to stop them. The boy, Michael Turner, fought back. Roy pulled his gun. One shot. The boy fell by the car. The girls screamed. I didn't shoot, but I held the door. Roy said, no turning back now. He told me to round them up, told Barnes to clean up. Morgan clenched his jaw. The two girls. Merritt closed his eyes. Roy forced them into the car. I couldn't look. When I turned back, the car was rolling down the slope. Roy told me to burn the scene. I heard two more shots, then fire. I ran. I ran from it. The room fell silent, only the recorder's steady hum. Vega asked. And Barnes? Merritt looked up, voice hoarse. He panicked. Later, Roy feared he'd talk. A year later, he made me go with him. We met Barnes at Reed's Ferry, said we'd split the money. Roy told me to drive. He sat in the back. As Barnes got in, Roy shot him in the head. I remember the gunpowder, the mud, Roy said. It's done now, Clyde. Then he made me sink the car. I did. I hit it. Morgan breathed heavily, hands clenched. And then you became a pastor. Merritt gave a crooked, bitter smile. I thought I could atone with prayers, but the river doesn't forget. I still hear it in my dreams. Roy's voice. The kids. The water. Vega pressed. Why keep the gun and the Barnes Ferry? Done note. Merritt replied. Roy made me write it, to remind myself it was done. But for me, it was never done. Every time it rained, I saw the river rise in my mind. I knew this day would come. Morgan looked at the man before him, silver hair, trembling face, no trace of resistance. Only the exhaustion of a lifetime carrying guilt. Roy Dunlap died in 2010, he said. You knew that, didn't you? Merritt nodded. I attended his funeral. No one knew. I stood at the back, hearing people call him a Yazoo hero. I just thought, at least he was buried before being named. Vega wrote in the report. Subject confesses partial involvement. Identifies Roy Dunlap as primary shooter in 1978. Triple homicide. Self-admitted disposal of victim vehicle. She read it back to Merritt. He nodded, voice soft. I told you, the river kept my secret for 37 years. Now the river has spoken. Carter stepped in, handing Vega a freshly printed file. Reed's Ferry case, status update. The final line was bolded, case type, changed from missing persons HOMIC. Morgan looked at the words, then turned to Merritt. Clyde, do you regret it? Merritt met his eyes, cloudy and wet, and said, I regretted it from the first night. But regret doesn't save anyone. Only the water knows everything. When Vega turned off the recorder, the room sank into silence. Outside the glass, Rain began to fall lightly, tapping the window frame. Merritt sat still, uncuffed, staring out, his voice hoarse like a final prayer. We thought we could bury our sins in the river, but the river only borrowed them to give them back one day. Morgan left the room, walking down the long, white-lit hallway. In his hand, the confession transcript felt heavy as a stone. After nearly 4 decades, the Yazoo disappearance had its true name, a murder. And in the rain outside, he heard the river whispering back the truths he'd waited a lifetime to hear. The trial began on the morning of October 3, 2016, in Jackson County Courthouse. During a quiet but tense autumn, the hallway was packed. Reporters, Yazoo residents, and aged faces of families who'd lived with waiting for 4 decades. A wooden sign reading, Mississippi State versus Clyde Merritt, hung on the door. A reminder that the small town's history was being rewritten in blood and memory. In the courtroom, cold light spilled through tall windows, illuminating the defendant, Clyde Merritt, silver-haired pastor, face gaunt, thin hands trembling slightly. Unlike other defendants, he wore no orange jumpsuit, permitted a plain gray shirt, a small cross still on his neck. Each time a camera flashed, Merritt dipped his head, avoiding the lens. The prosecution, led by Chief Prosecutor Elaine McCord, opened with a clear, firm voice. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not just trying a man. We are trying 40 years of silence. The statement silenced the room. McCord laid out the events, presenting evidence and the confession from the Ford Fairlane found in 2015, Lucas Barnes' bones, the Smith & Wesson .38, to the Reed's Ferry map, with fingerprints and the cassette tape. Each piece was displayed on a large screen, reflecting on the somber faces of the jury. The cassette played again, the first time since the interrogation, in absolute solemnity. Static crackled, then the man's voice. Roy, Clyde, they ran. The ferry, the sound echoed through the speakers. Some in the gallery shivered. Merritt, sitting less than 10 meters away, closed his eyes. When Vega, the lead investigator, took the stand and confirmed the voice matched Merritt's at 82%, the defendant only opened his eyes, staring at his clasped hands. Next came the DNA and ballistics presentation. A state forensic technician spoke evenly, projecting magnified images of 2 bullet casings with perfectly matched grooves, one from the 1978 scene, one from Merritt's gun. No random coincidence, he said. This is the same gun, no question. Then the DNA. Vega showed a comparison of samples from the gun's grip and the car's bones. The screen displayed YS-TER sequences, like glowing ladders. Merritt and Barnes' samples are on the same evidence, she said. One held the gun, the other died by it. The prosecutor closed slowly, each word like a hammer. Merritt was not just a witness, he was the hand that hid. The one who chose silence when children were killed. And when his accomplice threatened to talk, he chose to kill again. In the gallery, victims' families sat still. Sonora Hale, Julie's sister, clutched prayer beads, eyes fixed on Merritt. Mrs. Reed, Amy's mother, now over 80, was helped to the front row. When the silver JH bracelet appeared on the screen, she sobbed. No one spoke. Merritt's defense attorney, a young man from Jackson, tried to shift focus. My client was a victim of an abusive system. He followed orders from Roy Dunlap, who died in 2010. There is no evidence Merritt fired the gun. But McCord countered with one line. Following orders doesn't wash the blood from your hands. Merritt took the stand. He rose slowly, voice raspy as if drained. I've told the truth. I didn't want to kill anyone. I just wanted to believe I could live the rest of my life as a better man. When asked, "Did you hear your voice in that tape?" he paused long, then nodded faintly. "That was me," he said. "And they ran, not that they fled. I meant their souls. They ran from us, from this sin." His words left the room in a prolonged silence. That afternoon, the court recessed. The 12 jurors, 7 men, 5 women, entered deliberation. The wall clock ticked steadily. Vega, Morgan, and Carter sat outside in the hallway. Silent. 10 minutes became an hour, then 2. Time stretched, like the 40 years of waiting. As night fell, The jury hadn't returned. McCord whispered to Morgan, "They're considering leniency due to his age and following orders." Morgan replied, "Age doesn't dry blood faster." Finally, after 8 hours, the jury room door opened. The forewoman, a middle-aged woman, handed a paper to the clerk. The room stood. The judge read aloud, voice resonating in the thick air. "On the charge of first-degree murder of Amy Reed, guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder of Michael Turner, guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder of Julie Hale, guilty. On the charge of concealing evidence in the murder of Lucas Barnes, guilty." Merritt showed no reaction. He bowed his head, hands on the table, light highlighting deep wrinkles. Vega, behind, closed her eyes briefly. Morgan stood still, clutching his old notebook in his pocket. The room seemed to hold its breath. The judge delivered the preliminary sentence, life imprisonment without parole. Outside, rain fell, drops tapping the windows like the distant pulse of the Yazoo River. As police led Merritt through the gallery, he paused, looking at Morgan, once a colleague, now the one who brought him to justice. His voice was soft, just for them. "Jack, I know you believed the water would keep the secret, but now you see, water doesn't keep anything. It just waits for the right person to listen." Morgan didn't reply. He watched until the door closed. In the room, now filled only with the sound of chairs shifting and wind through the door's crack, the scent of rain, metal, and a case closed, after 37 years buried in mud lingered. On the morning of October 4, 2016, the Jackson County Courthouse was thick with a solemn, cold atmosphere. Reporters filled the front row, cameras ready to capture the final moment of a case spanning 37 years. The prosecution stood to the left. Vega and Carter sat quietly in the gallery. Morgan, in an old gray suit, sat alone at the back, eyes fixed on the bench. He'd waited half his life for this, not for victory, but for truth. The rear door opened, and Merritt was led in. Orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, silver hair, steps slow but steady. He looked at no one, dipping his head as an officer guided him to his seat. The cross necklace was gone, leaving a faint mark on his skin. Across the room, Prosecutor Elaine McCord arranged her files, her gaze resolute but not arrogant. She knew the verdict was set the moment Merritt heard his own voice on the cassette. Judge Raymond Harlan, white-haired, took the bench. His gavel struck 3 times, sharp and dry. He read the verdict, voice thick and slow. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimony, forensic findings, and the defendant's confession, the Jackson County Court finds the defendant, Clyde Merritt, guilty of first-degree murder of Amy Reed, Michael Turner, Julie Hale, and concealing evidence related to the death of Lucas Barnes. Verdict: guilty, on all counts. Sentence: life imprisonment without parole. The final gavel strike cut through the past like a blade. Merritt didn't look up. His shoulders trembled slightly, eyes on his gaunt hands. No plea, no protest. As security approached, he whispered, "So it is." In the gallery, a sob broke out. Sonora Hale covered her mouth. Tears streaming, Mrs. Reed, Amy's mother, nodded faintly. Eyes wet but briefly bright, as if finally seeing her daughter, named rightly, in court. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some left, but most stayed, silent. No one clapped or cheered, only a shared feeling filled the room, the quiet of justice long delayed. As Merritt was led out, Vega and Carter stood, watching. His steps echoed lightly on the tile. Outside, the crowd snapped photos, but he said nothing. Only when passing Morgan did their eyes meet. Morgan saw not a criminal, but an old man carrying a generation's darkness. Merritt whispered, like a breeze, "I hope God forgives, if he's still listening." Then he was gone. Outside the courthouse, local TV stations set up a podium. As Vega and McCord stepped out, dozens of microphones rose. They spoke briefly. The court has found Merritt guilty on all charges. The Reed's Ferry case, after 37 years, is officially closed. A reporter turned to Morgan, standing quietly at the back, shouting, "Mr. Morgan, you first investigated this in 1978 and brought it back to light. How do you feel now?" Morgan looked at the crowd, sunlight hitting his face, wrinkles deep around his eyes. He paused, then said slowly, voice low but firm, "I have no joy to celebrate. The 3 kids didn't come back. The guilty are old, the innocent dust. I only wanted the truth, not victory." The crowd fell silent. Cameras stopped, only the wind through old oaks around the courthouse. A light breeze carried the damp scent of Yazoo soil, evoking the river that uncovered it all. That afternoon, headlines spread nationwide. Mississippi pastor found guilty in 1978. Triple homicide. Case solved after 37 years. Online, people shared Morgan's statement, calling him the man who kept his promise to the past. But to him, it brought no pride. He thought only of the dim yellow light in the 1978 radio room, the storm, and the broken voice. Roy, Clyde, they ran. The ferry. That night, Morgan returned home, opening his window to the drizzling rain. He sat at his desk, opening his worn leather notebook, the one that followed him through the case. On the final page, under Case Solved, 37 years later, he wrote one short line, verdict, guilty, on all counts. Life without parole, justice isn't vengeance, but memory. He set the pen down, watching the light reflect on the wet street. Somewhere, the Yazoo River flowed slowly through the night, carrying darkness and secrets now spoken. In the soft rain, he heard a whisper, not Merritt's, not Dunlap's, but the river itself, saying what he'd waited 40 years to hear. Now it's at rest. In December 2015, Mississippi was cloaked in thin fog, the air cold and still, as if the land held its breath. At the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's headquarters, a press release was pinned to the bulletin board that morning. Case closed, Reed's Ferry disappearances. Official classification, triple homicide solved, 37 years after incident. All physical evidence, forensic findings, and judicial verdicts confirm final closure. The bolded words, once only in Morgan's unfinished dreams, were now real. No grand press conference, no flashing lights, just a dry administrative sheet, red stamped, marking the end of the state's longest investigation. That afternoon, Morgan drove to Yazoo. The old road along cotton fields and reeds was still there, only he had aged. The Reed's Ferry levee was reinforced, houses scattered, but the wind through the trees carried 1978's tone. He stopped where the bank had collapsed, where the Ford Fairlane was found last spring. Under the sunset, the Yazoo River lay like a mirror, reflecting pale sky and swaying grass. Morgan stood alone on the damp bank, holding his worn leather notebook. He opened the final page, reading his post-verdict note, guilty on all counts. Justice, not victory. He closed it, looking at the water. His reflection blended with the dusk, trembling in light ripples. In the distance, the Yazoo City Baptist Church bell tolled 12 times, steady and sad. Morgan closed his eyes, picturing 3 small lights drifting on the water, the Reed's Ferry kids, finally named in the state's records. He said nothing for a long time, letting the cold wind seep through his coat, then whispered, "Justice isn't a bang, but a whisper when all is still." On the river, a few yellow leaves spun, carried away. Morgan took a small paper from his pocket, a copy of the MDI's release, and let it fall. It twirled, glinting silver in the dusk, then sank into the muddy water. He turned to his car, but paused before closing the door, looking back one last time. The Yazoo River was calm, no trace of old years, only wind and water brushing the bank like a long breath. He thought of rainy nights, altered files, buried voices, and people who thought they'd escape justice forever. In his mind, his own voice narrated, hoarse, slow but certain, "No secret stays buried in the mud forever. Only time, and those who wait, bring it to the surface." Morgan got in, started the engine. As the tires rolled on the narrow road, wind from the river rushed through the window, carrying the smell of earth, water, and memories of souls now at rest. The car's clock read 5:47 p.m., sunset, touching the horizon. A day ended, and with it, a case closed. The Yazoo River flowed on, silent as if it had seen nothing. But somewhere, under deep mud, time held untold stories, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. The story of Mississippi 1978, Reed's Ferry disappearances, is not just a closed criminal case after 37 years, but a profound reflection of America, where justice may come slow, but is relentlessly pursued. In it, Jack Morgan doesn't represent victory, but steadfastness to truth, even when the system, community, and time seem to want to forget. He is the image of an ordinary American who believed transparency and justice are society's foundation, even if it took half a lifetime to prove it. The Reed's Ferry case reminds us that truth cannot be buried forever, just as the Yazoo River returned what people tried to hide. In today's America, facing misinformation, division, and doubts about justice, this story is a reminder. Only honesty, courage, and responsibility keep society standing. As Morgan said at the trial, "I only wanted the truth, not victory." That's the attitude every citizen needs when facing adversity or injustice. Looking at Pastor Merritt, who used religion to cloak his sins, we learn that morality lies not in titles or status, but in each person's choices. And Morgan's final line, "No secret stays buried in the mud," is a reminder for America today. Only by facing the past can we truly step toward the light, where justice is not just a verdict, but how people live honestly with one another. Thank you for joining us to the end of the Reed's Ferry case, where justice finally rose from the river after 37 years. Subscribe to our channel to not miss other true crime stories, where the past always finds a way to speak.